Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds. My name's Tom Fowden, and I'm the chair and organizer of Grand Rounds. It's a pleasure to be here to see you today. We try to keep the Grand Rounds programme varied. We have clinical case presentations, we have research output. Last week, Kevin McConville, in my absence, thank you very much, Kevin, I've just seen you on my screen, hosted the Harden Award finalists with talks from students. And we have some talks which, like today's talk, which are hugely valuable to us as trainers, clinicians, educators. Ben Ulyatt, my friend and colleague, works in the anaesthesia department, oft found on a bike, disappearing into the middle distance, and also is one of the associate directors of medical education. Has been doing that job for a long time. In fact, Ben taught me when I went on my educational supervisors training course when I was a registrar. So that's how long ago that Ben's been doing this job. He, along with the team in the Office of the Director of Medical Education, have done a lot of work on trying to simplify and streamline recognition of training, which you'll know if you're a doctor in the audience is the thing we have to do in terms of the GMC recognition, that we're able to train people in a recognised role of educational clinical supervisor. It's something we all need to do, but it's something that we could do better. And Ben and Jordan, who is in the audience as well, I think, or will appear, making it more straightforward for us. So Ben, thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to your talk. Any questions, please put them in the chat. And if you share your screen and slides now, Ben, we'll get cracking.
Thanks, Tom. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Tom?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll just share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that? Jordan, can you give me a thumbs up?
Yeah, we can see your screen, but good to go.
So we're keen to talk today about recognition of trainers because it confuses a lot of people. Even dumbed down versions of ROT explanations, I've been told, are not dumbed down enough. So we hope to make it easier to both get into and provide some evidence for this, to keep you right in terms of your ongoing development. So what I'd like to go through is just exactly what we mean by recognition of trainers, talk about the roles that require a recognition of training, what those requirements are, and then Jordan's going to tell you about how to plan your own CPD and actually what's the best way of providing that evidence and what's perhaps the easiest way for you to do it. And at any point, if people want to raise your hand, we're happy to answer questions. But also, we're hoping to do a bit of Q&A at the end. So what is ROT? Well, it's been around for about 10 years now. And what happened is the GMC thought that we should all do appraisals, and our whole clinical practice should be looked at so that we're constantly updating it and delivering stuff to a high standard. And that includes education and our educational delivery. And so recognition of trainers is really part of that process to ensure that we keep up to date and we keep educating our learners as well as we possibly can. And a group called the Faculty of Medical Educators came up with 7 framework areas. And the GMC took these on, and these are what we have to aspire to. So the framework areas are ensuring safe patient care, which is obviously a good thing, establishing an effective learning environment, teaching, facilitating learning, enhancing learning through assessment, supporting and monitoring progress, guiding personal and professional development, and continuing your own development, as an educator. And the two in red there, 5 and 6, have a more sort of longitudinal look and support of a trainee in particular, in terms of monitoring progress and the trainees' development. And so these are 2 extra ones that I'll come on to that are more relevant to educational supervisors rather than clinical supervisors. So that's what ROT is. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to roles? Oh, okay, I'll move on. So for roles that require this recognition, there are undergraduate roles and postgraduate roles. The undergraduate ones are probably more straightforward. So these are folk who have a block lead, a module lead, teaching leads, sub-deans, or year leads, those sort of roles. So within our organisation, clearly the teaching leads are deans and block and year leads. I think that's fairly straightforward, but anyone in any of those roles needs ROT. Postgraduate roles tend to be a bit more confusing, but the 2 postgraduate roles that do need ROT are named clinical supervisors and named educational supervisors. So what do those roles look like? Well, there's, as I say, clinical supervisors and educational supervisors, but there's a 3rd group, which is the supervising clinicians. And this is where I think some of the confusion comes in, because those top 2 sound extremely similar. I mean, there's only a couple letters difference. So I'll try and simplify that. So a supervising clinician is all of us. This is all doctors, and it's part of good medical practice. You do not need ROT to be a supervising clinician. And it basically means you do your clinical work, you do a bit of teaching and stuff whilst you're doing it. You may get some students in with you, you may get some trainees in with you. And when they're with you, you do a bit of teaching. And number 42 there emphasises the patient safety role. So supervising clinician is all doctors, does not require ROT. As opposed to clinical and educational supervisors. So the GMC define a clinical supervisor as a trainer who's responsible for overseeing a trainee's clinical work environment and is appropriately trained to do so. They provide feedback, etc., and will decide on whether a trainee can progress to the next stage. So it's a bit more involved. There's an element of feedback there and an element of decision-making on how able that trainee is to move on to the next part of their training. And I'll talk about that role again in a sec. As opposed to an educational supervisor, and this is a much more sort of longitudinal overview of trainees, and it's someone who is appropriately trained, responsible for overall supervision management, trajectory of learning, that help trainees plan their role, look at learning outcomes for educational agreements, and also you need to, an education supervisor is involved in the ARC-P process, so a summative judgment at the end of the year. So that's the definitions, but in practice, I mean, what do they look like? So I am an educational supervisor, but I'm also a clinical supervisor. I'm also a supervising clinician. And so in my role as a supervising clinician, as I say, this is all of us. I'll be doing a theatre list. I'll be giving anaesthetics to patients. a trainee might join me. We'll do a bit of clinical stuff together, and hopefully the trainee will get something out of it and do a bit of learning. And the kind of question I'll ask is, what would you like to get out today? Okay, let's do this, that, and the other. And hopefully by the end of the day, you'll learn X, Y, and Z. And we should all be doing this. It's good medical practice, and we don't need ROT. In comparison, in my role as a clinical supervisor, so a trainee will join me for a neuroanesthesia block. So they'll join me for 4 weeks. There'll be specific goals within that. And at the end, we'll be responsible for signing off completion of unit of training. And this probably happens in my office or in a coffee room, but perhaps some of the discussion might happen in theatre. But some of this role is out with the working environment. And the conversation will go along the lines of, this is an introduction to neuroanesthesia. By the end of the next 4 weeks, by the end of the block, we need to do X, Y, and Z and sign off this, that, and the other. And for this, ROT is definitely required. And it requires the 5 domains. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7. When I'm an educational supervisor, this definitely happens out with the workplace and probably in the office or coffee shop or wherever. This is at least a year normally, if not more. And so we'll meet at the beginning of the year, we'll discuss outcomes that are required at the end of the year, do a personal development plan, and we'll agree to meet in the middle and again at the end. And at the end, we fill in the structured educational supervisor's report, which then feeds into the RP. So the conversation will be, welcome to anesthetics. I'm here to help you achieve X, Y, and Z by the end of the year. And ROT is required for this. And because it's got that educational supervision longitudinal bit, you need the 2 extra domains, so all 7 domains. I do also offer some pastoral support as part of this. It isn't actually written into the role, but it's something that might be nice to offer our trainees. Equally, that the pastoral support may fit with someone else. Okay, I'll pause there. Any questions about those roles? Has that simplified things or made it more confusing?
Hi, Ben. I've got a sort of question comment. I can see in your speciality, this slices up very nicely because trainees do a block of neuroanesthesia, then they do ortho for a bit, and then they do some ICU. In some other specialities, so like our own, we don't necessarily have that clear definition. You just come and do some medicine for a bit. And I was just reflecting to Dave Connell, who shares an office with me, that I think we're pretty good at supervising clinician roles. We're pretty good at educational supervision roles, but perhaps the bit that gets missed is that clinical supervisor role of the day-to-day feedback stuff. And I think that those two, the clinical supervisor and supervising clinician, can be conflated, and perhaps CS and ES can be conflated. I don't think there's a question there. I think it's just maybe a reflection on how different specialties, different areas may do this a little. It can be confusing.
Yeah, you're right. It can absolutely become confusing, and there's confusion between all three, and certainly with your own specialty, the nuances might be slightly different. And I plan to not at all get bogged down in this sessional allocation into that, because that's a whole massive kind of worms. Okay, so that's what ROT is, and those are the people who need to do it. How do you get your ROT, and what are the requirements? So basically, this is separated into two bits. There's the initial recognition, how do you get in at the very beginning, and then there's ongoing recognition thereafter. So initial recognition is via a form, and you get this form from the Directorate of Medical Education. You fill it in, and once it's all filled in and all agreed and signed off, this then comes to us in the Directorate of Medical Education. We sign it, and then we send it to NES, who also scrutinize it. And then if everyone's in agreement, everything gets signed off, and you have ROT. And the NES sign-off is a relatively new thing in the last couple of years, so it's under more scrutiny. Because they're looking at every single application, it does need to be filled in fairly comprehensively. So that's initial recognition. Within that, there are 3 routes into providing the evidence you need for that form. Route number 1 is do a course. And that can be an NES course, it can be one of your college courses, and we do a local course. So Jordan and I run a course, and I think Jordan might mention that later. It's an afternoon, and attendance at one of these courses ticks all of the boxes that you need in terms of evidence, and whack that in with your form and job done. Route number 2 is you provide a whole portfolio of evidence, and this is probably aimed at more experienced educators who haven't yet got ROT, and you provide a whole load of evidence mapped against the 5 or 7 framework areas, and that should suffice for ROT. And route number 3 is kind of in urgent circumstances. This is where perhaps a trainee doesn't have an educational supervisor and we need to get someone really urgently for them, but there's no courses coming up. And this is an educator in training agreement. So we basically give you temporary pass for ROT so that you can get on as supervisor trainee, pending a promise that you'll do a course in the next 9 months. But that's sort of in extreme circumstances. In addition to all of that, you have to do a course of diversity training and attach a certificate, and you need some time in your job plan. And so there's self-certification in the form saying you've done a course of diversity and that your clinical lead has agreed some time in your job plan. And so if you do all those bits, either route 1, 2, or 3, and the course of diversity and job plan bit, submit it, and that should be you signed off for ROT. Any questions about initial recognition?
And I think it's very helpful to clarify that sort of emergency temporary role thing. That in NES, we often find people talk about having a provisional registration or provisional acknowledgement. So it's not really that, but there is clearly a process. How frequently do you issue those? I've forgotten what you called it already. That's terrible. The agreement, is that a commonplace thing, or is that once in a blue moon?
During COVID, all the time.
Yeah.
Now much less so. One of the problems is because there were no courses during COVID. As soon as COVID finished, all the courses filled up, and you couldn't get on for love nor money. So that's why Jordan and I do a local course. But yeah, once every couple of months, I would say.
And what's the chase up to make sure people don't end up being on a temporary certificate for a long time? If you've got, I'm sure Jordan has got a database and chases it up.
So Nest hold that.
Okay.
That they have systems that run that, and we get a reminder.
Sally Ibbotson has said, she's confessing all on the chat here. I haven't done any of these forms, but have been an ESCS for many years. Is the form only for people just starting ROT roles, or should I have done this?
I'm confessing, I'm suddenly thinking, oh my God, what have I not done?
So yes, this is an initial recognition form, so it's only for people starting out with ROT. And what I'm about to talk about is ongoing recognition. And it's, I'm not sure I've met you, Sally, but it's possible that when you started, this form may not have even existed.
I'm sure that's right. We have met, but I'm sure that's right.
When we first implemented it in 2016, Sally, we pulled over all the people that we felt were already in a position to be in a recognised role, and you will have definitely been included in that. So it's been an evolving process, but you will have been transferred without even knowing, probably.
That's my confession resolved. Thank you.
So on to ongoing recognition. So this really is part of the appraisal process. So it's a discussion between you and your appraiser. And as I said right at the very beginning, it's part of looking at your whole medical practice, including your educational role. And after the first round, re-recognition gets linked temporarly to your revalidation. So they both happen at the same time. So every 5 years, you need to revalidate and you need to be re-recognized as a trainer. And the full cycle of evidence mapped against each of those 5 or 7 domains needs to be provided over that 5-year period. Doesn't all have to be done at once. You can feed it in piecemeal, a bit 1 year and a bit another year. But by the end of the cycle, you need to provide evidence mapped against the ROT domains. And what does that look like? So for most people who do their appraisal on SOAR, I get to see your Form 7. I don't see any of the other of your appraisal stuff, but Form 7, the education stuff, comes to me and then onto NES so that we can look at it to sign you off again every 5 years. Now, did everyone know that? Because appraisal is otherwise a completely confidential thing. And I've asked this question several times, that no one has said that they're worried by it, but does that concern anyone? I'm not getting lots of yays or nays, so so as I say, it is only the Form 7. The rest of the stuff is absolutely personal and private. So we get to see your Form 7, and this is an example of a really good form. And firstly, the appraiser has put some helpful comments in there. And so for anyone who's an appraiser, a few comments are very helpful for me and for Ness, who will then go on to look at this. There's a bit where you sign off, self-declare that you've got the license to practice, et cetera, and that you're going to provide the information required. And then all of your information can be linked. And so this person's appraisal is excellent. They've got tons of stuff. They've got a list of what they do, some teaching materials that they've done, and perhaps more importantly, some feedback. So some sort of quality stuff on what they have delivered. And then finally, at the bottom, and this is the most useful bit for us looking at it, they've mapped that information against the 7 domains right down at the bottom there, as well as identifying their educational roles. And that isn't terribly much stuff there. So the stuff at the top is just ticking boxes. There's a list of information, and there's certainly less than half a side of text down at the bottom. And this shouldn't take forever. And if you have over the 5 years piecemeal added little bits into your ROT, this shouldn't take hours and hours and hours, and hopefully should be a fairly painless process. And I know some people will think, well, this is a total pain in the arse, and I get that. But these sort of the evangelical educationalist in me thinks that actually, can we improve as educators? Can I improve? Is what I was doing 10 years ago the same as what I'm doing now? Well, no. Can I get better? Yes. And I think we've all changed, particularly during COVID. Certainly grand rounds all used to be face-to-face, and we've never have done it on Teams. So I think the way that education is delivered is changing and does change. So I think that while some of this paperwork is a pain in the arse, the actual process is a very, very good one that helps to become better educators. And I think Jordan might show you a table similar to this later on, but this is something that we find really, really helpful. If you have your evidence supplied and which bits of the framework is mapped to some tick boxes, that makes it very easy to look down. Yes, okay, this educator has done all the stuff, sign them off, happy days. And to sum all that evidence up in 3 lines is if you can show what you do, so some teaching, some supervision, why you do it that way. So I do it that way because that's the best way they learn, and I've changed it over the years. And how well do you do it? And this is some kind of feedback. And you answer those 3 questions for all the domains. That's easily enough to get ROT. So yeah, what do you do? Why do you do it? And how well do you do it? If anyone wants more information, and we can perhaps put this slide back up again at the end after Jordan's spoken. But there's NES have got a load of information on the DME website. If you Google Scottish Trainer Framework, it takes you to this page, and they've got a little sort of infographic there to try and simplify the process. And likewise, our own Director of Medical Education page. And again, if you Google that, it spits out this page for you, so there's more information there. Are there any questions?
There's nothing in the chat, Ben. So, Jordan, have you got some slides? Have you been drawing on your iPad to thrill us with pictures?
I've not been drawing, sorry to disappoint you. But
I look forward to your hand-drawn slides.
I've had feedback that my handwriting's not that easy to follow. So, but what I have been doing, so as Ben said, the recognition of trainers stuff came in about 10 years ago now. And I was reflecting on the fact that I think I've been working on this stuff since about 9 years ago. So over that time, I've collected quite a lot of people's tips and tricks for how they go about doing this in a easier, more accessible way. And just sorry for introduction's sake, my name's Jordan. I work in the medical school as staff development lead. So I've got a role in making sure that our trainers and teachers have access to CPD to help them with this process. So I've collated the top 5 tips that I've come across over the years. The first one being, have a folder in your email inbox marked ROT. And as you get bits of stuff coming into your inbox that are related to your teaching role in any way, shape or form, pop them in there so that you've got a bit of a filing system for then uploading that onto SOAR or whatever process you're using for your appraisal. So it might be certificates of attendance at conferences or CPD events. It might be things like teaching timetables, training rotas, teaching resources. Just make it easy for yourself and have a filing system that works, because half the battle is just collecting the stuff. Most of you will already have the stuff, it's just gathering it in the one place that can be challenging. So that's a tip that comes across a lot. The next one is to be a bit savvy about sharing resources across your department or team. So it might be that there's certain bits of evidence that are applicable to the whole department. For example, you might have a regular meeting with the trainers, or it might just be a kind of senior consultant meeting or a medical management meeting where you discuss educational issues as part of that. Including the agenda of that meeting is evidence of your engagement with teaching and training as a department. So having a shared folder on the shared drive in your department or on a Teams area somewhere where you can put these bits of evidence that might be applicable to multiple trainers within your department can be a nice way of helping each other out collecting that evidence as well, which I thought was quite a nice way of doing it. Ben mentioned having a mapping grid to organise your evidence, so that little grid with the 7 domains. And we actually have a version of that. I'm going to pop the link to this page that I'm talking to at the moment in the chat box so that you've got access to it. But we've got a mapping grid template that you can use, which when it opens up will just kind of help you think through what are the different bits of evidence that I've got, what do they map to, and any little notes that you've got on that. So there's an exemplar there of some year 4 student feedback from the past year, the areas that might map to 1, 2, and 3, and some notes about your thoughts on that or what you're going to do about that bit of evidence as well. So that makes it easier for you to see where the gaps are, but also easier for your appraiser to see where the gaps are or how much of the framework has been filled out. So again, we'll give you a link to that. Number 4, engage in local CPD opportunities. So we run a range of different CPD events that are currently mostly still online, so accessible like this from wherever you are. They are all mapped to the GMC framework for ROT. So you can quickly look down a list and see what's going to cover framework area 4, for example, because that's where I've got a gap, and then sign up to that. I can, again, all these are free and open for anyone to access. If I click on, so this is a kind of overview of the stuff that's available at the moment. Again, I'll share this link in the chat box shortly. But if I go on to the booking site here of the different CPD opportunities that are upcoming and just select one, I can see there that that's the framework areas that one maps to. And any of these sessions that you attend, you'll be sent a certificate of attendance that notes those areas as well. So then you've got that bit of evidence that you can upload for appraisal, making it easy for you to see what bits you've achieved. And finally, bit of a tip is just anything that you do and upload as part of this. If you include some bits of reflection, it just makes it much more meaningful and much easier for people like Ben and people in NES to see that you've actually engaged with the learning rather than just ticked a box to say that you have. So for example, I always say to people, just use a really basic framework of what, so what, now what. So what did you do? I attended this thing. So what? Well, actually, it made me think about X, Y, and Z, or thinking about doing something slightly differently. Now what? Some actions for what you might do going forward. And you could answer those 3 questions for every bit of evidence you put in your portfolio, or you could pick or choose the ones that makes most sense. And it just makes the evidence a little bit more meaningful and less tick boxy and more likely to lead you into actually genuinely thinking about your development going forward rather than just ticking the box to say so. So that is the main tips I wanted to cover. I'm happy to take any questions about any of them. But this is been collated over the last 9 years of talking about ROT and trying to make it easy for people. And I will pop the link in the chat box. Okay.
Ben and Jordan, it strikes me that that this part of the of ongoing recognition of training is quite dependent on your appraiser. I mean, it's almost entirely dependent on your appraiser. And what do you do if your appraiser is perhaps not so well engaged in this bit? Let's, you know, on the spectrum of just ticks a box to ignores it completely.
Yeah, so you're right, the discussion happens with your appraiser, but it gets assessed by us and NES. So you know, there is a responsibility there, I guess, to have that evidence down. Very happy for people to contact us to discuss it further. And one thing that does happen is when appraisers come to the end of year 4 of the cycle, we get to see what evidence they have mapped against ROT at that stage, so that we can send out a reminder saying, you know, really well done, you're pressing with X, Y, and Z, but domains 4 or 5, have you thought about the evidence for that? Because it's just a year away, so you can get a reminder of that later. That's how it's supposed to work. COVID has somewhat paused the ROT process a little bit, but we will get back to that at some point.
That's great, really helpful. And as an appraiser, it is, I think, really useful to know that you are seeing these comments, but you're reading them and they're valuable to you. That's why putting them down in the appraisal process.
Yeah, definitely.
If I put my NES hat on briefly, this process is so important to us in the quality side of the training program management and the quality assurance side of things. From a training program management point of view, we simply can't have training programs unless there are people with ROT and sufficient people in each department to be able to run the department. And we rely completely on the Office of the DME to facilitate that, keep those lists up to date, and to give ongoing training and support to people who are in recognised roles. So on behalf of NES and the East of Scotland region, we thank you for all the work you do working alongside us. From a quality standpoint, you know, we continue to review that, and when we have deanery visits, external visits, that sort of thing is monitored closely, and the quality of the clinical supervision and educational supervision is in the National Trainee Survey. It's in the Scottish Trainee Survey. It's one of those flags that we in the quality stream rank very highly. You know, if you could be all green flags, but if it's red flags for quality of educational supervision, you can almost guarantee you're going to get a visit. So we value it, trainees value it, and clearly there's a lot of great work happening here, so thank you. Anybody, I've hogged the microphone here. Has anybody else got any questions, comments they want to make? If not, I can go and start my clinic a bit early for once, which is nice. Ben and Jordan, thank you so much for speaking at Grand Rounds today. I will send you a certificate for your portfolio, and you can put it towards your ROT. And if you can tag it into a separate mailbox that says ROT. I've learned that today. There you go. Everyone, thanks so much for coming. This recording will be edited and mixed around and uploaded to YouTube, like all the other videos are eventually when I get around to it. Next week at Grand Rounds, he says, stalling for time, it is John Irving from cardiology, a regular to Grand Rounds. I have no idea what he's speaking about on this occasion, but always entertaining, always interesting. Dave Connell has just suggested to me it's probably about the heart, so thanks for that insight, and we'll see. So I'll let you know more next week when he lets me know. Grand Rounds, same time, same place next week. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.